every 48 hours, an Earth defender loses their lives in defense of nature. These companies, they came bringing money by the
Yeah.
truckloads, literal carton boxes filled with money, and they wanted to use it as a bargaining chip in exchange for timber, in exchange for land.
Yeah.
And our elders at the time, they decided that this was not what they wanted. They protested. They blockaded the heavy equipments that those companies brought. Hope, I think, is the very center of what my community is about. It's this one village in the heart of Borneo, surrounded by stories of all the destruction, all of the injustices that has happened, but still stands tall.
Hello, welcome to Earth Talk, the podcast for people and the planet. A space where we talk about global challenges from different perspectives, whilst we try to focus on solutions and reasons to be hopeful in times like these. I'm Leo Holdak, and thank you for tuning in. Hello, welcome to today's Earth Talk episode. Our guest today is Kynan Tegar. He's an Indigenous filmmaker and Indigenous rights activist from the Iban people from the Sungai Utik village, a village which is located in the very heart of the customary forest in Borneo, Indonesia. Kynan is the co-director of the just-released short film Earth Defender, a film which portrays a life that is lost while protecting nature, as every 48 hours an Earth Defender goes missing or is murdered while protecting nature. Kynan and I share a conversation about the history and the fight of the Sungai Utik community, of the protection of the customary land, and as well about the importance and challenges of decolonial storytelling. We talk about the behind-the-scenes process of making such a film like Earth Defender, as this film was a collaborative film project with studio Birthplace, and as well with the musician Novo Amor, whose song Years On is a score of the film. So, up front, a big thank you to Kynan Tegar that he takes his time to share his perspective with us. Hello, welcome to today's episode. Today our dear guest is Kynan. He's an Indigenous filmmaker from Indonesia. So Kynan, thank you so much for taking your time being here. And first, how are you?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me here, Leo. I'm good. It's been a long day at COP, as it always is, but it's been productive for sure.
Thank you. So for all the people right now listening, they maybe have never seen you, maybe they never heard your voice, maybe some did. Do you mind to give ourselves like a small introduction to you that we know a little bit better who you are?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Kynan Tegar. I come from the Iban people of the Sungai Utik village. It's this small village in the western part of the island of Borneo, Indonesia. And in this village, we all live in a longhouse, in this one massive building that's 200 meters long,
Wow.
where around 200, 300 people live. And right next to the longhouse, we have this river called the Utik River, which is the namesake of our village. And it's the river that we have kept clear for generations upon generations. And if you step into the water, like even if you're neck deep, you would still be able to see everything clearly down there. It's also surrounded by our customary forests, more than 9,000 hectare, which is also kept protected by our elders and our generation to my generation.
Wow, that sounds beautiful. It sounds like, honestly, like just when I try to visualize that, living in like that kind of a long house with so many people right next to like a really clear river surrounded by a forest, that sounds like a really beautiful place to be.
Yes.
I would love to hear still a little bit more about the place somehow. Like maybe we can kind of make like a small walk in our minds through your village or through your home. Like how does it looks like more specifically sometimes, or how does it sounds like? How doesn't maybe also how does it smells? Maybe
Mm-hmm.
how does the food taste? I don't know. Like I'm really curious actually, like how the place is because I've never been there.
Yeah,
I can
yeah,
also
yeah.
imagine that the people right now listening, they also have never been there or to like a similar place. I don't know. It sounds really like a beautiful, special place somehow. So I don't know. Shall we go for like a small walk through your through your home?
Yeah, yeah. It's so imagine it's this big, almost monolithic structure that's made entirely out of wood,
Mm-hmm.
and it's built high up, so it's on stilts,
Oh
basically.
wow.
And you would climb up a ladder to go into it. And the moment that you start walking into it, you start hearing the small cack. I wonder what the word is. Cackle? I don't know. But the floors, all of it would shake up and down. The wooden
I get
floors.
what you mean. Yeah, it's more like
Yeah.
creaky noises. Yeah.
Yeah, the wooden floor would shake up and down, creating all of these sounds so that every time someone walks in the longhouse, you would know that they're coming.
Yeah. And I can also imagine that you already also know by how it sounds that you also know which person is coming. Yeah, I
Exactly.
get you.
Yeah, the longer you spend, the more you recognize
Yeah, yeah.
someone's footstep, right? Yeah, but then you would also be greeted by this big communal space that's like, I suppose you can call it the living room of the longhouse. We call it the ruai. And in the space, everything happens really. Uh, Kids would play, people would weave, make arts, make crafts, have meetings. Everything happened in this one communal space. Children would play around it, and elders would be there to scold them whenever they made too much noise.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a place with a very warm feeling for me
Mm-hmm.
because of just how united everything is.
Mm-hmm.
You can really feel that it is one community. The community is one.
Mm. Wow, it sounds really like a beautiful place. And it's like I can imagine obviously then I mean all generations are at the same obviously and then it's the same place. It's like a really, really interesting place also like that where like the young people are like spending time together with old people. I'm just saying that because like I feel like in my home like back in Germany in Hamburg um we kind of even it seems like that we're locked up the old people in those elderly homes and we have
Yeah.
like like the like those kindergartens for the children like there are hardly any proper spaces where old and young people really meet just instead when they're maybe like when there's their same family they're meeting at like a family home or something but it's still there's not so much like a meeting point somehow for intergenerational exchange somehow.
Yeah, I guess that's true. It's exactly what you said. It's intergenerational exchange that happens every single day.
Yeah.
And that's how knowledge is usually transmitted in our community. I
Mm.
remember as a really little kid, I'm maybe like 5 or 6, my grandfather would take me on walks to our fields,
Mm.
the places where we would grow rice.
Yeah.
And during this walk, it would be through forests because our fields are quite far away from the main longhouse.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually at least a 2-3 kilometer walk
Oh
through the
wow, okay.
forest and all the way through that long walk. I remember as a child, I would just ask for my grandpa to like pick me up and take me on his back just because I couldn't be bothered to walk anymore.
Yeah.
But during that journey, he would tell me all of the fruits, all of the flowers, all of the mushrooms
Mm-hmm.
that are in our forest. What is this one for? What is that one for? And it's this intergenerational exchange that happens so naturally.
Mm-hmm.
I think that makes our way of knowledge exchange unique.
Yeah. Wow, this sounds I don't know why I'm right now so touched, but it just sounds really beautiful. Like really. Thank you so much for sharing that. And now you describe a little bit like your house and like how it looks like, and also a little bit like the people there. Um, and how is like the natural habitat around your home? Like, is it like, I mean, you already said it's like a forest, but maybe can you give us also, can we also make like a continue our walk in our imagination also maybe like outside of that
Yeah,
house?
sure. I think whenever I mention forest, I think that it might be a very different idea of what a forest might be to you. Like maybe you could tell me what comes to your mind when I
Sure.
say forest.
Okay, I mean, you already told me about Indonesia, so I imagine when we're talking about your kind of forest, I think most likely it will be more like a jungle, I guess so.
Sure.
But when you ask me, different kind of pictures, but I think the forests which are close to my home. So, well, it's not hard to say those words like in English because I don't know like the proper translation, but I don't know forests like how they are in Germany. I don't know, like
Mm.
I mean, it's obviously many trees, but we don't really have. I think in Germany we don't really have pristine forests. So
Okay.
that means like at one point there were always like humans logging, came in logging and get like the wood for like building whatsoever, you know, like so I can imagine that my understanding of forest is different to you, definitely different to yours, but also I think that the forest I have around my home is has way less animals and
Mm.
insects inside, so I think it's way less like biodiverse. So I think that is my take on the forest somehow.
Yeah,
What
that's
about your forest?
yeah, that's really interesting because I think when people think of like indigenous peoples living in the forest, it's they sort of think of this pristine place of people that are untouched by anything really. This forest that has been there for hundreds and hundreds of years, and sometimes that might be true, but most often the land that we call home, the forest that we call our customary forest, it's a forest that has been cultivated in the past. It's a forest that has seen humans live off of it, but in a much different way than it seems that the global north thinks taking from the forest is. It's a way of taking from the forest where we are we don't see it as taking. We see it as borrowing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what my elder told me. They told me that we are only borrowing the things that we have. We'll one day have to give it back. We'll have to give back our forest one day. And we wanted to we want to keep it in the condition that it was lent to us. Much in the same way that if you lent your friend something, you wouldn't return it broken, right? You would
Yeah,
do
of
your best
course.
to take care of it.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. And still, can you try to elaborate a little bit, like how does the forest looks like, or like what kind of like trees
Mm.
and animals are living in this kind of place?
Yeah, the forest back home in Borneo, it's very, very diverse. That's for sure. There are just countless varieties of trees and such. And like I told you before, my grandpa would take me on walks, but unfortunately, I'm not really good at paying attention, so I barely know any of the names. Maaf kakek, tapi um, but
It's fine.
I hope they're not listening. Um, but yeah, it's this really rich, lush green space that's always dotted with strange colors. Like you would think that it's all green, but it's not. There's so much orange, reds, blues within that forest. There's just so much richness, diversity within it.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's beautiful. That sounds really like a really nice place. Hey, I'm sorry for the small interruption. I just want to mention shortly that Earth Talk is not a commercial podcast project. To stay independent, we need supporters who make this project possible on a sustainable basis. If you like this podcast, feel free to join our Patreon community. The link is in the description. And also every share, comment, like in the socials or good rating wherever you're listening to this podcast is a big support. Thanks a lot in advance, and now back to the conversation. I'm curious about the people and your community. So, how is life living with 200 or 300 people like in this long house? Like I can imagine it's quite intense somehow. Yeah, like how long have you guys been living in such a way there? And yeah, like seriously, it sounds so stupid. I hope this I asked this question in the most respectful way, but I'm just seriously curious, like also for the people right now listening, like that we have like a better understanding, like seriously how your home is and how you guys are, or your family and your neighbors and us and so on are treating each other.
Since as far back as I can remember and my elders can remember, we've always lived in a longhouse.
Yeah.
It's not something that's new at all. And that's how I was taught by my elder, and my elder was taught by the elder before them. That was how we lived. And the way that the longhouse is structured is that it's this one big building that has rooms within it, individual rooms for the families living in it. We call them billets. And in each of this billet, you can have families, individual families, and it's not just like the nuclear family of where there's a father, mother, and their sons or and daughters, their child, but it would be extended families bigger than that. You would have cousins, aunts, uncles, all of them living within the one billet inside of this one longhouse. In a way, I suppose you can call it a horizontal apartment building in that sense, but it's also completely different in that within this structure, there's always within the structure, there's always that intense sociality within it. Everybody knows everybody, and I can imagine how that can seem very intense to you, and I promise it is. At times, like there are plenty of times where you would just want to go and escape into the river, of which I did a lot. But it's something that is unique, I feel. That feeling of being a family, a really, really big family.
Wow. That sounds seriously amazing. Thank you so much for sharing this kind of insight. And I know, I can imagine it's quite intense, but it sounds like a really, really warm and lovely place. And I can imagine that people right now listening, they would also maybe one day love to experience a place like that. As we're talking in this podcast about also the climate crisis in that sense, and we try to talk about the difficulties people are facing as a result of it. I can also imagine that you are sometimes, or maybe not even sometimes, that you also have some form of like another contact with the climate crisis, or some form of contact of a big change. Can we, if you would like to, can we have maybe like a small conversation, or like also a big conversation, how maybe life right now is different maybe in your home than life maybe there, maybe let's say 500 years back, as you said that your ancestors remember this way of living the whole time, so maybe that stayed quite similar, but maybe still there were now like external factors which are changing. So how is life different in that sense? And also, just to be upfront, I want to really navigate the space as respectful as possible. And as I already know you a bit, I can imagine that some of the answers you will now share, I do know, and that will deal with colonization and people like white people causing a lot of harm. So please navigate the space as safe and as comfortable as you want to, and also share the things you would like to talk about. I really don't want to make you feel uncomfortable or trigger something, so I just want to say that up front, because I think there's like a really I don't know, I just want to be really respectful in that sense, as
Yeah.
there's also like a dynamic here that I am white and my ancestors were causing big harm. Just want to say that
Yeah.
up front.
No, thank you for prefacing that. I want to ask though, like, what would you prefer to go into more of like a, I don't know, like philosophical direction, or do you want to talk about more of a uh, real life, what is happening kind of experience thing?
As you prefer, honestly, like I'm really
All right.
open for both. I think the real life experience, like I think is really, really important, and I think really, yeah, it's just I think really important to highlight
Right.
about.
Got it.
But I think also like which philosophical ideas you have in that context are also really interesting. So it's really up to you. You really do both, and we'll have time for this conversation.
Sure. Yeah. No, I just wanted to go back to what you said about community and how that's unique.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting idea that being a community is unique, when in fact, it's quite the opposite, I would say, that most societies have always been a community, have always been one entity, but it's just that with modernization, the effects of colonialism imposing these new ways of life, it has definitely changed that direction towards one of individuality,
Yes.
solitude, where people are cut off from the things that make up who they are. They are alienated from the food that they eat, the people that help get it to where it is. And it's this connection, not only this loss of connection, not only with nature, but also with other humans. It's something that seems to be gradually loose. Like it's a connection that continues to gradually weaken.
Yeah.
And it seems that, continuing from your question, what has changed
Yeah.
in that time span? There's a lot. I guess if you want to go quite deep into the past, you can talk about the colonial history that my people underwent. So the Iban people were known as warrior tribes, were known as warring people, were known as relatively nomadic people. Historically, the Iban people, my people, we've lived on the island of Borneo, where now there's three different countries, three different sovereign states
Wow.
claimed the territory of it. And in the process, they drew up these borders across the island, borders that are very much imaginary. Like if you look back through the old cartographies, you can see that the lines, some of them are just straight up just straight lines going through the entire island. And from that, you can see how absurd it is. But what really hit home for me was understanding that these lines, though they may be fictional, though they may be constructs of our imagination, they divide the lives of people living on these two sides of the border.
Yeah.
Families were divided because of the border.
Yeah.
People living in the same village were divided because of these borders. There were stories of this one village where the border ran straight through their longhouse.
Really?
And so they had to move because of that. They needed to choose. And they were one of the lucky ones that were able to choose where they pledged their allegiance, I suppose. But really, it's an interesting question when you think about it. In the process of the creation of these nations, the the people, my people, we weren't consulted in it. None of us, there was no one that came to our village and asked, "Hey, do you want to join our country?" But so it came to be. That's just how it happened. We're now part of Indonesia. And since then, since 1945, which was when we were incorporated into it, we have tried our best to navigate this hierarchy of power that is the nation state. And there had been plenty of conflicts within that time. Conflicts mostly when it came to our natural resources. The word natural resources itself is a very, very colonial word, isn't it? It brings into mind ideas of water, land, forests, timber, gold, coal, commodities. But as indigenous peoples, we didn't see it as such. It wasn't commodities, it's our life. The land, the river, the trees, it's our source of life. We didn't see it as a commodity. It's not something that we want to commodify. But unfortunately, when you live within a structure of hierarchy, you're not always in a position to have a say with what is to happen with your land. In the 1970s, a logging company came to our territory, to our land. They came bearing with them the signatures of the government. They were given concessions on our land, a concession that we didn't have any clue about, a concession that we did not agree upon. But they saw, the government and the company, they saw that this is empty land, really. They felt that it was within their purview to designate it as a production force, as a source of timber. And our elders did not agree to that. I remember my grandpa saying that if what we wanted was money, then we would just sell all of our trees, our land. We would sell all of it. But when it runs out, when there is no more tree left to sell, when there's no more water running through the river, then the money would be worthless. Then we would have no other source of life. Then they would not have anything left to give to our generation, the generations after them. It was this extremely forward thinking that made it so that to this day, our forest still stands. Our elders, they fought for it. It wasn't just a small decision to go against those companies. They had to fight for it. They had to lay down their bodies at times, literally being human shields in the face of corporate greed. And such is the reality in so many places, not only on my island, but in the rest of Indonesia and the rest of the world. That's a reality that happens, a reality that is lived by countless millions of people. But our elders, they persevered. And that's why I'm so very grateful for them, for all the work that they have done. That's why I'm so inspired by them, really, to continue the work that they've done, because it's not just over. We still have so much we need to do. And yeah, I'm very honored to be able to continue their fight.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. And upfront, I'm really sorry what you just shared, like pointing out that your elders laid down their bodies. Um, but just to continue a bit on this story, like how did that go? In which sense are now still the trees standing? Yeah, like when the company came, like 1970s. Like what happened then and now, what's now happening there? Like, are they still there, the company, or like in which way did that progress?
Hmm. Solidarity, I think, is the answer. Solidarity is why to this day we still have our forests. Everyone in the village united. They were one in the face of this massive ongoing threat. They they put their bodies on the line. Unfortunately, no one lost their lives, but it was a very difficult time for our elders, of course.
Yeah, of course.
It's a story that they very rarely share the details of,
Hmm.
but
Let's say, I was just interrupting, but like,
yeah,
let's stay as respectful. Like, you don't need to share that
yeah.
when they're not even sharing it. So like, sorry, I don't want to
No, it's
ask too
okay.
much of it. Let's really, like, please navigate the space that you feel the most comfortable in.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Um, I guess what I want to say is that um, these companies they came bringing money by the
Yeah,
truckloads, literal literal carton boxes filled with money,
yeah,
and they wanted to use it as a bargaining chip in exchange for timber, in exchange for land.
yeah.
And our elders at the time, they came together. They decided that this was not what they wanted.
Hmm.
They protested. They blockaded the heavy equipments that those companies brought. There were plenty of times that they caught companies illegally logging on their land, and it was not a one-time occurrence. Even if back in the 1970s they drove off the first company, more and more continued to come.
Yeah.
It was a very vicious cycle in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
One that continues to be perpetuated because our community or indigenous peoples in general in Indonesia, by default, in the law, we were not recognized. Our very existence as a community was never recognized. That's why, as I said before, our land is considered as state land because it doesn't have any registrations under it, because it was not claimed on a piece of paper on the dotted lines to belonging to these communities. The state saw it as fair game, and they did as such. The 1970s was the boom
Mm.
of timber, of logging,
Yeah.
of deforestation in Indonesia. I remember a statistics saying that back in the 1960s, right before that boom, more than two-thirds of the island of Borneo was covered in forest cover. But now, fast forward to 2013, which was when that study was conducted, now the forest cover is only 40%.
Wow.
So, a massive drop in that amount of time. And that reflects how many communities have had their lifeways taken from them,
Mm.
have had their lands dispossessed, their way of life change in ways that we can't begin to fathom.
Yeah. I understand, and thank you so much for sharing that. And I would like to continue in our conversation now, maybe a bit now on your own story. And somehow what you're doing and like I already know, don't get me wrong, but for like our listeners, I would really like to if you want that you could share maybe a little bit like what you're now really passionate about, what you're doing, and yeah, that would be I think that would be like a good start.
Sure. I grew up hearing all of these stories, the stories of the injustices that has happened and still continue to happen. I remember I remember my parents, my grandparents, they would go to the national court demanding for the rights of indigenous peoples because back then it was a right that continued to be violated, that did not have any legal way of ensuring that our rights were protected. There was no legal instruments for that. But then in 2012, there was a landmark court decision that said customary forest is not state forest.
Mm.
That meant a lot to communities, to indigenous peoples throughout the archipelago, throughout Indonesia.
Yeah.
But what makes it difficult is the fact that to be afforded that protection, that your forest is not state forest, you need to be recognized as a customary forest. You need to be recognized as a customary community.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole nother bureaucratic process that for my community it took them 8 years since the 2012 court ruling to be able to be recognized as the rightful owners of their land, of the rightful owners of their customary territory. And it was around this time, 2019, 2020, that's when I started getting into film, started
Yeah.
getting into photography.
Oh, really?
I I documented the entire process of it, of how my community received our customary rights. It was it was a long journey in the
Yeah.
making since the 1970s, which was when our elders first protested against the companies that came to our community,
Mm-hmm.
until 2020. That's more than 50 years. 50 years of us fighting for our rights, fighting for our forests. And I had the privilege, the honor really to be able to make a film about that, to make a film about their fight for recognition,
Wow.
of their eventual victory in this process and what it really meant to the community. And it was a film that was was really important for me
Yeah, of course.
and to my communities too. And luckily, I've had the chance to be able to screen it in indigenous communities throughout Indonesia.
Yeah, may I ask,
Throughout,
what's the name of the film? Maybe like, or is it like somewhere available that also people right now listening can see it?
yeah, it's actually on YouTube,
Okay.
on the If Not Us Then Who channel, and the title is Sungai Utik Fight for Recognition.
Okay. Can you spell Sungai Utik?
Sungai space UTIK.
Okay. I think now 100% of people can find it.
Amazing.
Wow. All right. That sounds like really like an interesting path you took there. And how was that process of making this film for you in that sense?
Hmm. Um, Before that, I when I was growing up,
Yeah.
I had the privilege to have satellite TV at that point.
Yeah.
I remember as a 5 or 6 year old, I would always be glued to the screen watching BBC, National Geographic, the Discovery Channel,
Yeah, I get you.
and I saw all of the documentaries that they had, and I don't know, I was just such a nerd for it at the time, I guess. But Well, the thing is that I never saw our people on the screens. It was always our forest, but never the people that are living in it, never the people that are protecting it. And I guess that's why I make films now. I want to be able to tell our own stories from our own perspectives as Indigenous peoples. And when I made my first film back in 2019, uh, it was it was a long process of just learning by myself, trying to grapple with these technologies that have for too long been used as tools of the colonizers. You know, media has always been used to steer public opinion,
Yeah.
to shape the way that we see the world. It's a literal tool of propaganda and has so often been used against us.
Mm.
That's why, for me, it's so powerful to take that tool and use it for our own purposes, to, on our own terms, co opt this.
I really like the thought. That's brilliant. Yeah, I get you totally.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Take it, take the narrative into our own hands,
Yeah.
portraying ourselves through our own lens.
Mm-hmm. And also just to make it clear, like I can imagine it was such a big effort for you to learn all those skills making the movie and like a film. Like I can tell by myself, like as I try to learn how to edit
Yeah,
and do this podcast and everything, like it's a lot of work. And I'm pretty sure like I had much better resources somehow to learn all those things. So that's incredible that you made that possible. Like I have like a huge respect for that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's very true. Unfortunately, it's something that has a pretty big barrier to entry, right? The ability to make your own media, your own films.
Yeah.
It's something that is also heavily affected by the historical injustices
Yeah,
that
of
Indigenous
course.
peoples have faced, right? The economic disparities, the lack of access, it's something that continues to happen to this day. And I suppose that's where we have our work cut out for us. But we're seeing a resurgence now of people on the ground creating their own films, maybe using smartphones or cameras. But what's most important is that we're really doing like what I said before, we're trying to take the narratives into our own hands to shape our own stories. And it's this process of decolonialization, really, of how we see ourselves as Indigenous peoples, and also how the people who watch the things that we make see Indigenous peoples not as the one dimensional picture that it seems has pervaded our history, but as complex, nuanced human beings.
Okay, I understand, and that's really, really powerful, in my opinion, that you now, yeah, that you kind of took like this tool of oppression and kind of changed it around. That's really, really powerful.
Mm.
So, just like a small head up for the people right now listening, I met Kynan at a release screening here at COP29 of his film Earth Defenders. And that was like one of the most touching like movies I've ever seen. Like seriously, like I was touched to tears. I'm not even kidding. Um, could you maybe like tell us a little bit about how this movie kind of like started, like what was the process behind, and also maybe give us like a brief introduction actually what this movie is about, that the people who are right now listening have like a glimpse or an idea
Mm.
of what we're talking about.
Yeah, thank you, Leo. The movie, the film itself, like you said, the title is Earth Defender. It started out from this one statistic that we heard being thrown around. This statistic that says every 48 hours, an Earth Defender loses their lives in
Hmm.
defense of nature. And it was this statistic that we wanted to humanize in a way, to make it so that it's not just a statistic, to put a face to the numbers. And that's what the people over at Studio Birthplace, who I collaborated with on this project, came to me with. They first approached me. They first approached me with this pitch deck that they had about an Earth Defender, about their family, their community, the grief of that loss. But they came to me and they wanted to consult me on it. And that's when the collaboration began. In the process that took around 2-3 months with them, we we continued having this dialogue, this back and forth, when concerning what kind of story was it that we wanted to convey. It wasn't. I didn't want it to be a story that paints Indigenous peoples through that colonial perspective.
Yeah.
Through it, I didn't want the story to just be about the grief that the community experienced, the sadness that they experience because of the loss. I wanted to be something more than that. I wanted to be something that shows that despite all of that, despite all of the setbacks, the troubles, the injustices that Indigenous peoples face, we still have the power to fight on. And will still keep on doing that. We will continue to regenerate. The fight will never end. And that's the story that I wanted to convey.
Mm-hmm.
When we arrived at the community, though, we spent an entire month doing on the field, doing research, I suppose you could call it, but really it was just consulting with everyone in the village. About once every week, we would have these meetings where everyone in the village would come into the ruai, into the shared communal space. It would be
Wow.
elders, women, children, everyone would come, and everyone would be able to voice their opinions, to say what they think about the project that we're doing. And it was in this process that the story was really reshaped once more, accounting for the community's perspective. It was at this time that so many changes. Like I distinctly remember Sil and Yorick were panicking because in the beginning we wanted the film to begin with the scene of the death of the Earth Defender,
Yeah.
the community grieving in it, but that wasn't something that the community wanted,
Mm.
because to us death is something that is very sacred.
Yeah.
I remember one of the elders saying that if you want to have a Hollywood actor go play the part of the Earth Defender, have them die on screen, then yeah, go ahead, we don't mind. But if it's one of our community members, that's something that we just simply do not do.
Yeah.
You do not act like death, because it's something that's very sacred. And still in Yorick, they were panicking, the people from Studio Birthplace, because that would mean reshaping the entire story, of which we only had a couple weeks left. And so we try to find our solutions, just talking with everyone, seeing what is what is appropriate to portray on the screen,
Mm-hmm.
what is everyone comfortable with that still delivers the same message.
Yeah.
And the end result is the film that was premiered here in COP29 a couple days ago.
Mm-hmm.
A film that tells the story of the upbringing of an Iban child from the very first moment that they were bathed in the river, introducing them to the river that is the namesake of our community, them playing around in the fields, in the forests, with their family, with their parent, going fishing, dancing. The life of an Iban child, really. And then diving into the diving into the destruction That is the reality, the destruction that is impeding on this way of life, the protection of it, the lives lost during it. And this is the story that means so much to our people,
Yeah.
because it's a story that we as indigenous peoples all share.
Yeah.
This collective story, this collective trauma really of our kins losing their lives in defense of nature. When one tree falls, we all feel it.
Hmm.
When one of our kin falls, we all feel it. This collective trauma is something that's been passed on for generations and continues until this very moment. And it's something that through this film, I personally, as one of the filmmakers, as the co-director, I tried to reconciliate within myself. I tried to, in a way, make peace with this, to bring new meaning to this statistic, to this fact that every 48 hours an Earth Defender dies. I tried to reframe it in that, yes, it's true that these injustices, these crimes continue to happen, these violations of not just indigenous people's rights, but just human rights continue to be violated. Yes, that is all true. And so we must not let it be taken for granted. Their
Yeah.
sacrifice cannot be taken for granted.
For sure.
We need to do something. We need to take action. Because if it's not us that's doing something, then who will? We are the next generations. We shoulder the burden of everything that has come before us, and we are the ones responsible to push forward.
I understand. And before we dive into the topic of action and which way that like how you would like to see kind of action, I would still be curious somehow like about the process of the filmmaking. You already touched upon many things that you were always like had those meetings in the village and that you were like that they were consulting you. Maybe also we have like a rough picture like studio birthplace as I know it. Those are two people, right? And also one thing which you mentioned at the panel, which I was when at the screening, you said that it's sometimes a difficult situation when people want to make movies, like white people want to make movies about like indigenous peoples, like they often just like have like this really colonial like mindset about it and this colonial lens. What do you mean by that in that sense, and how would you wish in general that collaborative film would happen? And did it work well on your side? Did you have the feeling that, yeah, there was like a collaboration you felt comfortable with? Or were there also sometimes hard times you were like, oh, well, this is not really going as I thought this is going to be?
Yeah, that's very true. There's always been this colonial lens that's used to view indigenous peoples. It seems that the prevailing notion is indigenous peoples as these peoples, traditional people, dare I say primitive people. That's how a lot of people have painted us. That's how anthropologists historically have painted us. That's how filmmakers still continue to do so to this day. Like just when we were at the village, another film crew came in to our community. They weren't from the area, of course. They were from a different country. They
Yeah.
came to our community. They had this script that had all of the scenes in it. There was the scene of people dancing in traditional clothing in the forest.
Okay.
And from that image, I hope that you're able to see how colonial that imagery is. They had this idea already in their heads, and they wanted the people in our community, my family, to perform their visions, and then to have that imagery, the video of them doing that be put up on the news, be put up on the television screen, and if that came to be, it would just continue to reinforce what other people thinks of us. And I think that's why it's so important to decolonialize this process, to move away from that colonial lens. And for me, that there's two main points in decolonial filmmaking.
Yes.
First is who are you making the films for? And the second is who is making it. That's the two most important aspects. The first one, for me, in this film, the film was made for Indigenous peoples. It was made for the movement of Indigenous people, the global movements of Indigenous peoples towards their rights, towards the recognition of their rights. It was a film that's made as a tool for advocacy, in a sense. We wanted to be shown in spaces such as COP, such as these global spaces where decisions are made. We want us to be part of that conversation. And the hope is for that this film to be of use to that movement. The second is who makes these films, right? Because the storytellers matter. The world is narrated by far too few storytellers. We need that diversity of perspective.
Yeah.
And here, especially because we are making a film about Indigenous peoples, it's so important that we are able to tell that story through our own perspective, through our own lens, on our own terms. And for me, in this collaboration, that was something that was able that was something that happened here in this context.
Wow.
The people at Studio Birthplace, they wanted me to be the co-director on this film with them, and in that role, I was able to substantively be part of the process, directing where the story is going to go to, how we're going to portray the things that we want to portray.
Yeah.
And to me, that's just so important, those 2 points.
True, and I'm really, really grateful to hear that in that process you were not disappointed somehow. That's really, really nice. And so when you were like shooting this film, like at the end, like really, you came from like the planning to like the shooting itself. How was that for you?
Yeah, it was a very long process.
Yeah.
It was a process that taught me a lot of things, for sure. Like, I discovered a lot of things that I didn't know about my people. I didn't know about myself really throughout the process because of all the dialogues that we had.
Yeah.
And it was a very meaningful process. Like, to me, making films, especially with communities, that's more so about the process rather than the actual end result.
Yeah.
That's why it was so important. There was this one really, um, interesting scene that we had planned out from the start. We had planned to rent out an excavator.
Yeah.
You know, this symbol of destruction almost. Like, I'm sure you have seen, and probably some of the viewers have seen, how excavators, heavy machineries are trudging through the forest, destroying it, ripping apart trees.
Yeah.
And in this film, we wanted to use that symbolism, but take it into our own terms. We wanted to portray this very real adversarial moment between the Earth Defender and this excavator, this symbol of capitalist extraction of natural resources.
Yeah.
We wanted to have this material symbolization of it. And I think in that sense, in that process, we also, in a way, co-opted that imagery, that symbolism
Yeah.
of the excavator to make it as something that's not all conquering, destructive, but as something that we are able to conquer too. That
Yeah.
it's not this impending, unstoppable force, that it's something that we are able to control ourselves.
Yeah, totally. That's so powerful, really. Like, that's really, really powerful. And as we're like moving slowly to the end of this conversation, and I'm also, by the way, I'm so grateful that we have this conversation because there are so many beautiful insights from you, and I feel we could like talk on for such a long time, as yeah, you have so many interesting stories to share, and also the way you're sharing those are really beautiful. Um, I mean, we already not touched upon many things, but in this podcast I mean we already did, but I try to focus also like what gives people hope somehow. And as the I will ask two questions, and the first question would be like quite a general one, but you can like focus on how you would like to focus on what gives you hope in that sense, moving forward.
Hope. Hope, I think, is the very center of what my community is about. It's this one village in the heart of Borneo, surrounded by surrounded by stories of all the destruction, all of the injustices that has happened, but still stands tall in spite of all of that.
Yeah,
Hope lies in the future generations that will continue to do the same work as the elders have before us. Hope is, I feel, lies in that generation, but hope also lies in the solidarity between all of us.
yeah,
Like I said before, we as Indigenous peoples shoulder these collective traumas, but I think because of that, we're able to have this strong sense of solidarity. When I meet an Indigenous person, a kin from a, a completely different place, from the Amazon of Ecuador, for instance,
mm,
from the Arctic regions, even though we are from such different cultures, we share this one thread, this solidarity between Indigenous peoples. I think it's something that continually gives me hope.
yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And the last question in this podcast is always the same, as I would like to give you the last words of this podcast. And so if there are any thoughts you have left, or any ideas like which we didn't touch upon and I didn't ask, but which you feel like are quite important for you to share to this audience, this is the chance to do so.
Mm.
From my side, Kynan, I would like to say a huge thank you that you took your time being here. And yeah, honestly, like for the film you did, like I really, really hope to see many more films of you. Oh, maybe also just like one other question beforehand, how the people can see your films and can maybe like see your work, maybe also I know, get in touch with you. And yeah, as I said, thank you so much for taking your time being here. Honestly, it's a big, 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 big pleasure. And the last words are yours. Thank you.
Last words are always difficult. Like, how do you summarize everything that we've already talked about, huh? To me, what's most important is for us, especially in our current context, in the context of the climate crisis, all of the humanitarian crisis that we're facing, is to be open to all of the different ways of seeing the world, the different perspectives that we have, because that's something that we are also facing, this epistemological crisis, the the ways of knowing of Indigenous peoples, the diverse perspectives, lenses that lies within that. It's something that we need to amplify. It's something that the world is lacking, and it's something that can contribute in a very meaningful way to stopping the climate crisis. And yeah, you can follow my work on my Instagram at Kynan Tegar, KynanTegar. And you can also check out our latest film, Earth Defender, on Novo Amor's YouTube channel. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been a really, really meaningful conversation.